Hello everyone, welcome back to C# Fundamentals from Scratch. It's Alex Horton here. And today what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit more algorithm training. We're going to study some simple conditionals and some loops, and we're going to introduce ourselves to a couple of more explicit types of variables. So let's go ahead and get started. So one of the things that we talked about in the previous tutorial were explicit and implicit variables. I, by no stretch of the imagination, am the ultimate end-all be-all when it comes to the definition of explicit, implicit. It's just a really down and dirty way of kind of explaining what those are to you. So obviously I was talking with a guy at work and he very swiftly corrected me on some things. I would say corrected me. It's more of an interpretation of things. So I'm trying to get it down to a more simple level. And he's like way smarter than I am, I think. So knowledgeable, I shouldn't say smarter, knowledgeable. So what we're going to do today again is we're going to create an algorithm, but what we're going to do is we're going to use some explicit types to store some data and to make a couple of containers or variables for those. So the first thing we're going to do is I am not a fan of the show Empire. I have never watched a single episode of it, but I know there are people out there that have. So we're going to talk about that show Empire. We're going to do something with individuals from the show Empire. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to create a string of data, and we're going to call it Empire string R. And what we're going to do is we're going to store some data into this string, but we need to store more than one string. So there are there's a ton. Again, I've never watched the show. There's a ton of different characters on the show Empire, but the ones that I know of are these right here. So we have Lucius, we have Cookie, Hakeem, we have Jamal, and we have Andre. And so we are going to make a container that contains all of these, but if you can see, it's giving us errors here because we can't really do this. So what we need to do is we need to make a container that will hold multiple strings in it. Well, we call that an array. And what an array basically is, it is a container of any type that you give it. It can be an array, it can be a string array, it can be array of integers, but you can make it to store more than one value inside of the array. So let's go ahead and give our C# variable the correct signature to make it an array. And to do that, right in front of this string declaration, or this keyword string, we're going to put an open brace and a close brace. And this indicates, hey, this indicates to C#, hey, I want to make this Empire string array into an actual array of strings. So how do we get this information into our array of strings? Because you could see, it says, hey, you can't take a string and turn it into a string array. So what we need to do is we need to create a new instance or a new object of a string array class or a string class. So we're going to say new string, and we're going to create an array there. So far so good. Now what it does is it says, hey, anytime you make an array, you have to tell me how big it's going to be. How many strings do you want me to place into the container? So think of it this way. You have a carton of eggs. Each egg on the inside is in its own little carrier. So you have 12 cartons of eggs. You have one carton of eggs or a dozen of eggs, but you have 12 eggs in it. You can look at the actual carton of eggs as an array, and if you wanted to use egg number 3, all you're going to do is you're going to number the eggs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And then if you need to use, I'm sorry, let me go back for a second, because arrays start with an index of 0. So if you have 12 eggs in the carton, you're going to start with the first egg, and you're just going to go each row by row. You're going to start with the first egg and give it the number of 0. The next one's going to be 1. The next one's going to be 2, and so forth. So actually, what's going to happen, you have an array with 12 eggs, but the array index of each egg starts with 0 and ends with the number 11. So on this instance, what we're going to do is we're going to make an actual array. We're going to, and we already know the size of our array, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what now we're going to do is we need to use the curly brace. And these are curly braces right here. So now I can see that I've got an array, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strings in it. How will we use this? Well, we can use this. Let's do this real quick. Let's create console write line, and we're just going to say empire string array, and we're going to look for the index of 3. And since it's a string, I'm okay casting this, because write line looks for string values or any other value that you have in it. You don't have to put a toString on it because it's already a string of arrays. So anything in there it's going to treat as a string. So if I run this, I should come up with 0, 1, 2, 3. I should come up with the name Jamal. And let's see what that says. 0, 1, 2, 3 says Jamal. See that? So if I hit F10 on my keyboard, I should have Jamal there, and I do. Now what would happen if I said 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Let's say I said 5 here instead of 4. Well, what's going to happen is C#'s going to look and say, hey, you don't have an array with 5 strings in it. It's looking for the index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's expecting another name here. Now this is the length of this array. Here, and we can show you this by saying console write line empire string array dot length. And we'll put a toString on there because it's a. Now, if I run this, this is going to tell me that I have five values in my array. You can see that on the debug window here, it says I have a string with 5 indexes of an array. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. However, since it starts on 0, number 1 is Lucius, number 2 is Cookie, number 3 is Hakeem, number 4 is Jamal, and number 5 is Andre. Okay? And so if I debug this, I'm going to get a null reference exception error or an object reference error. It says index is out of the bounds of the array. It's saying you're looking for number 6 in your actual array. That's what that means. So if I wanted to do this, I'd have to put a number 6 on there, another array value. And now if I run this, this count is going to go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like it does there. And the number 5 is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going to be a blank line there. You see there's no blank, there's nothing there. So what we're going to do with our algorithm, I understand that for obvious reasons, the character who played Jamal, the individual, the actor who played Jamal, we're going to call him Juicy Smouye. I didn't come up with that on my own. I would suggest you watch Dave Chappelle, Sticks and Stones. You'll get the joke. We're going to get rid of all of this right here real quick. Okay, so we need to find out which of these characters is not on the show anymore. Now, we already know that Jamal's no longer on the show. And again, I don't watch Empire. I just Wikipedia'd it, and I got that information from Wikipedia. So if Wikipedia is wrong and I'm wrong, y'all blame Wikipedia. Don't blame me. So we need to create another container, because even though we've got our names here, we want to assign a value next to the name that says, is Lucius on the show? Yes. So we want to do something like this. We want to ask a question. We want to say, is on the show still? And we wanted to say either true or false. That's what we want to do. But we want to read it like this. And we want to get to when we get to Jamal, it's going to say false. Something like that, right? So let me get rid of that because I want to keep my code clean here. I'll just leave that there for now. And we want to do something like that. So what we need to do is we need to create another container that allows us to store a value, and we're going to create this as a key. So we're getting ready to create a key value pair. If you think of it this way, it's a good idea of a key value pair. If you think of a, no, let's stick with this. Let's stick with this. We're rolling here. So to make a key value pair, one way to do it is to create a data dictionary. And as you see, a dictionary is just a generic collection of values that you can put in there. It creates a key value pair. So to create this, we're going to put the less than symbol, and our key goes first. So we know our key is a string, and our value, we want it to be a Boolean because we want to look for true, false. Now we're going to give our dictionary a name. Let's just call it Empire Still on, oops, Empire Show Dictionary. And then we're going to make it a new dictionary. And if you, as you type, the IntelliSense will automatically do some stuff for you. You can just hit tab, and then to create the reference to this or the new object, we need to make an open parenthesis and an ending parenthesis and put a hyphen, a semicolon on the end. And now we've made another container where we can store our key value data. So we've got step 1 underway here. Now the first part of step 2 is we're going to create a Boolean value that we can use as a flag. That's going to be this part here. We're going to say true or false. Is Lucius on the show or not? Yes or no. So let's just make a Boolean value by saying bool is still on show. And we're going to default it to true. And this little squiggly line you see there, it says, hey, you don't have to really do that. You don't have to unnecessarily assign a value to is still on show. And if you hit control period, it shows you some things that you can do here. Let's say I want to remove this redundant assignment. If I click this, it removes the entire value. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to leave it there. But if you ever see the little squiggly lines here, if you hover your mouse over it and you hit the control period, it can show you a better way to do some things here. This is an instance where it's actually using, oh, I can't remember what that's called. It'll come back to me. So we've created our Boolean value we're going to use as a flag. And now what we need to do is we need to learn how to iterate or go through this data using some different loops and conditionals to find out who's on the show, who's not on the show. So let's do that. I belong to a Stack community called Unlock Academy. It's run by a guy named Antoine. I'm drawing a blank. Antoine. What is Antoine's last name? I forget Antoine's last name. Anyway, he's got, if you go out and you look at Unlock Code Academy, he's a guy who spent some time in prison, I think 7 or 8 years or something like that, and he learned how to code while he was there, and he vowed that he'd never be apart from his daughter again. So he took steps to better his life and better his child's life and his family's life. So much props to that guy for doing that. Well, I belong, to their Slack website, which allows me to talk with folks on that website and assist where I can and stuff like that. And one of the things he's talked about doing, or one of the things that I see quite often is as individuals are getting help with their homework over there, is I've seen individuals struggling with while loops and conditionals. So I decided, I was like, well, you know what? I'm going to show you some different ways to do conditionals over here. And I'll try and explain it the best that I can in the way that I know how to. So there's multiple ways that you can, in C#, but if you learn this in C# or any other development language, you'll be able to learn this for all other languages because they follow the same bit of logic. The syntax, or how you type it on the screen, might be different, but the logic is still the same. So let's look at that for a second here. I'm going to do the first iteration loop, which is a for loop. So I'm going to use the IntelliSense, type the word for, and I'm going to tab a couple of times, and it creates a loop for me. Now, what this loop is doing is saying I'm going to create a variable called I, and I'm going to give it a value of 0. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, as long as I is less than some number that I believe, I'm going to continue to go through my loop. And then the last thing I'm going to do is each time I go through the loop, I'm going to add 1 to I. Loops are a great way for you to not have to do code over and over and over and over again. It allows you to create your logic in much more efficient blocks of code and to save yourself some time in typing. Now, when I worked in COBOL code, oh my gosh, it's such a painful language to develop in. We didn't have, well, you have loops in COBOL, but they're much more confining and they're much harder to use than this logic is. So let's look on how we're going. So that's the first kind of a loop. The next kind of a loop is a for R loop in C#. Now, I've never used a for R loop, but it just looks like you're going to do some different logic here. It's saying I'm going to create an I, and I'm going to give it the length -1. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to execute the length this loop as long as I is greater than or equal to 0. And then I'm going to subtract 1 from I. So this is basically the opposite of this loop. You're counting up in this loop, and you're counting down in this loop. This is a reverse for loop. The next kind of loop is, you know what? I'm not going to do a loop. I'm going to do the while. So a do is basically a loop that will execute as long as a condition is true. So it's really no different than these other two loops, because in these other two loops, this is your conditional right here and here. In this, you create your own conditional, not based on this integer value. So for example, if I wanted to say is still on show, I want to do some logic here. Do something while is still on show is true. So while this is true, then I want to do everything that I put in here. No different than this. While this is true, I'm going to continue to go through my loop. While this is true, I'm going to continue to go through my for loop. While this is true, I'm going to continue to go through my do loop. Another one is while, and I can make the same conditional. While this is true, do this. So far, so good, right? I mean, it's not something that's going to be earth-shattering here for you, hopefully. Now, the last one, and the one I use the most, and a lot of folks use the most, is the for each. And this is something that C# does really well. Now, you can use for each loops on just about anything that you have here. You can use it on collections. And what it's going to do, it's going to iterate through a collection of objects, kind of like our array up here or our dictionary. These are collections of objects. This is an array. And this is a generic collection of key values. So I can use any of these loops to do what I want to do. So let's demonstrate on how to use each of these. So the for loops are going to use exactly just about the same condition, except you have to remember one's going up, one's counting up, and one's counting down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this. In this particular additional loop or positive loop, I'm going to say, I'm going to set this value here that I need to be true or false. So I'm going to say empire string array dot length, because remember the length of this array is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it's going to be an index of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So as I go through this loop, if I get to the number 5 over here, then I'm going to stop my loop and I'm not going to keep going, because if not, I'll get that error, that exception that we had earlier. So let's say console write line. And now what I can also do, the cool thing about when you're using array values here is, or anything with an index, is as long as you know what place that it's in, you can call on it like I did earlier. But if you don't know the place and you want your logic to automatically display the names up there for you, you can do what we did earlier and use an index of that array. and that would just output Lucius. But let's say I want to do all of these. I want to output all 5 of these names. So instead of putting a 0 there, I'm going to put something that's going to be counting for me. Well, what is that? That I looks really promising. It starts on 0, and every time I go through the loop, it adds 1 to the 0. So if I say this is 0, and I go through the loop and I add 1 to it automatically, it goes to the next one. That sounds pretty slick. So let's put an I there in this one. Let's come down, and what we're gonna concatenate this string here too, and we're gonna say positiveness loop names are like that. Now let's do the same thing here. Let's say empire string array dot length, and it's a capital L, -1. So it's going to take 5 minus 1, which will be 4, which would be this one right here. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's going to say I is greater than 0, and it's going to count backwards for us. So it's going to start on this end of the array and give us the names in reverse. And all we have to do here is basically copy and paste this line in there like we did. And we're going to change this to negative. Loop names are that. Let's put a right line in here for some space. Now, let's do our do loop here. Now, anytime you have a do while or do a while or for each, you're going to have to build much more logic than your for loop. Do whiles, and for each loops are more specifically going to be used to do a lot more coding than what we're doing up here. So maybe inside a do while loop or a while loop or for each loop, you might put another loop in there or some kind of an if conditional or something like that. But as it stands right now, we'd have to iterate through our array in these loops. Well, we'll get to this one in a minute. I love for each loops. So in a do while loop, we're going to do something in here. So we know we're going to output do while loop names are. We're going to do something here. And in here, we're also going to have to oh, I get it. I know what we can do. I think I know what we can do here. Let's say I want to say if, so we still have to loop through our, or we have to iterate through our array. So let's grab this string array, this for loop here. And then what we're going to do is we are going to get rid of that. And we still have to do something with this dictionary, don't we? So let's go back here to this dictionary here. So we can say, now let's move into the if conditional here. We're going to do an if conditional here. If conditionals, and I made a little PowerPoint for this, I thought. Actually, let's do it this way. And it's at 13, it's 14. Okay, there we go. Okay. So You see me using a lot of these little, you know, punctuations and special characters, as they be called and stuff. But what we're going to do real quick is we're going to look at operators and if conditionals. So in an if conditional, well, first off, we have operators. We have what's called equality operators. I think that's what you call them, if I'm not mistaken. And what equality operators do is they check different things for you. You see me using these throughout some of these videos. A double equal, just like in JavaScript, will check to see if the value of both values are equal to one another. If they are equal to one another, then it's true. If they're not equal to one another, then it's not true. This operator, what it does is it says if this value is not equal to this value, then this entire conditional is true, because you're looking for the ones that are not equal to. The greater than symbol asks if A is greater than B. If A is greater than B, then it's true. If A is less than B, then this is not true. So if this A was 15 and B was 13, this would not be true. However, next line down, if A, I'm sorry, I have that backwards. If A was 15 and B was 13, then A is greater than B. If in this conditional, if A was 15 and B was 13, then A is not greater than B, and this is not true. If A was 13 and B was 15, this would not be true. This one here, this greater than or equals to, it's great to use when you need to stop on a specific number. If A is 13 and B is 13, and you're going through your conditional and you get to, you're counting and you get to A equals 13 and B equals 13, it's going to say on your conditional, is A greater than or equal to 13? Is 13 greater than or equal to 13? Yes, that would make this true. But if A is 13 and B is 15, it would say, is A greater than or equal to B? Or is A or 13 greater than or equal to 15? Then that would not be true. If A is less than or equal to B in this less than or equal to operator, so you kind of get the gist of it. Next, we're going to use these conditional operators. This is a logical AND operator. If A and B if A is not equal to B, I'm sorry. If condition A is not true, if condition A is true and condition B is true, then this would be true. If condition A is not true and condition B is true, then that's false. So you use this when you have multiple conditionals to look at. You would use this right here. Logical ORs. If A is true or B is true, then this entire condition is true. It says if any of the two operands is non-zero, then condition becomes true. When it says non-zero, that means true or false, right? 0 being false, 1 being true. Boolean values. The logical not operator you put at the beginning of your conditional, and it will say if A is true and B is true, then this will be true, just like up here. But you want to look for the opposite of that. If A is true and B is true, I want to look if not A is true and B is true. Then it makes the entire thing true or false. It'll make more sense when we get to using them. So let's look at a couple of conditions here. Simple if conditions. So we have a condition here You know, when you're younger and your parents are at work and you're home on vacation or whatever, and they tell you to do something, you don't do it. You ever had that where, like, my mom would always say, hey, I'm getting up and I'm going to work and this house isn't clean by the time I get home, y'all gonna get in trouble. So then the question is, and as I became a parent, I do that quite often myself. I have a 15 and a 13-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I always ask the 13-year-old especially, because she's the pack rat of the family. I say, is your room clean? That house better be clean. Is that house clean? I ask that question all the time. So let's look at that particular scenario. If you have a condition that's true or false, then you want to do something. So in this instance that we were talking about, if the house isn't clean, then you don't want to find out what's going to happen. If this, then do that. If you have a condition that is true, then do this. If you have a condition that you want to look at it's false, then do this. Really, really simple to think of. And if you don't get, if you want to write this down, or you want to, I'll take a minute. If you want to, put this there, then if this helps you, then I encourage you to look at this. Let's go on to the next one. So I'll, pause this and maybe write it down. It might help you. Now let's get into a little bit more stuff here. So we want to look at, if this condition is true or false, then do something else. Do something else. So in the same scenario of the house being clean or not clean, if my mom will call and say, if that house isn't clean, then you're going to get in trouble. But if the house is clean, you can go outside and go play. So in this instance, we have an else condition, which then, falls outside of the condition that we're looking for. So in this instance, if the house isn't clean, then I'm going to get in trouble. However, if the house is clean, which means this condition is no longer true, it's false, then I can go outside and go play. The else will handle any condition that does not meet the condition that you put inside of your parenthesis. Doesn't matter if it's true or false or not. If it does not meet the condition, the else is going to do the logic or the action that you dictate over here underneath your else. So that's why I put this in green, because I'd like to go outside and go play. And I did fall under this one quite a few times myself too. Let's look at the next one here. And this is more complex, obviously, and it looks like a lot, but it's not really a lot. So this is where we're going to get into an else if. We can say, if this condition is true, then I want to do this action. If this condition is true, then I want to do the same action. So my father would say, hey, your mom says she wants the house clean, but I want the grass cut too. So if the condition is true, then I can, if the house isn't clean, then I get in trouble. Else, if the grass is uncut, then I get in trouble. Else, if this is okay and I've cleaned the house and I've cut the grass, I can go outside and go play. That looks really, really funky. Now, obviously, you don't want to put the same condition in your else condition. You're taking care of that up there anyway. This condition is used basically if this if condition here is very similar to this one, except logic would not allow you to put the conditional in one line of code. That's when you would use an else if. And then the last one, I'm going to talk about making a more simple conditional, an or conditional. And so if your conditional here is true or false, or your condition is true or false, then do this action over here. Else, you can do this action down here. So, getting back to the chores, if the house isn't clean or the grass is uncut, then I get in trouble. And if in this instance, if one isn't clean, if the house isn't clean, but I did cut the grass, we want this condition, we want both of these to be true for this to happen. Or, if you're like your mom and dad, you know how your mom and dad is. If either one of these is wrong, then you're going to get in trouble anyway. If you didn't get in trouble with your dad, you're going to get in trouble with your mom. Now, one that I have that's missing here that I just realized is the and condition. And the way that works is, let me throw this up here real quick. So the way the and conditional works is it's very similar. You want both conditions to be true. In this instance, like I just said before, if the house isn't clean and the grass is uncut, then I get in trouble. So let's say mom gave me both of these chores. She said, if that house isn't clean and that grass is uncut, you're gonna get in trouble. If that house is unclean or that grass is uncut, you're gonna get in trouble. In this instance, they kind of mean the same thing. So you have to watch how you're using these. Otherwise, there you go. This would be what we would call a short circuit condition. In our instance, in the or, we want both of these to be true. You would use an and for that. In VB, you would say or else. Something like that. And in VB, you'd say and also. You want both of them to be true. Because in programming languages, if one of these is true, then it's going to do this. But what if my dad said I could cut the grass tomorrow? Well, and mom didn't know that, and I say go down here, then I'm still going to get in trouble for this grass being uncut. It's called a short circuit. So let's go back to our code here. We're going to make a conditional in here in our for loop. And we're going to say if empire string array I equals 2 of those, Alex, Jamal, then I want to do something else. I want to do something else. So since I know that that's the only one that's going to be true, that's going to be false, I'm going to mess around with the falses here because it gives me less conditionals to have to mess with. So let's say I'm going to create a key or add to our key value pair here. So I'm going to say empire show dictionary dot add, and I need to put in a string key and a Boolean value. So then I need to say empire string array I, comma, true. I can do it this way. And then I can copy that line down here. And I can say, oh, that's going to be a false. And that's going to be a true. So this is going to mark all the people not on the show. And this one's going to be all the people still on the show, right? And then, as long as my array is going to keep going through, this really doesn't matter here. I got that in there so you can see how we were going to reverse the two for loops. Now let's do the same logic. just like that. Except we're going to have to comment this out, because if we did this the way we have it set right here, then we're going to get an exception, because this key value would have already existed in the dictionary. So let's make a different dictionary. We're going to call this reverse. And then we'll come down here to the second condition. Reverse and reverse. There we go. Now the key values are going to be the same, but when we store these in the actual dictionary, if we don't sort the dictionary, it's going to go in the order that we put it into. And then in this one, we're going to leave this one alone here, because we're just going to show you we're just going to execute this on a code while this is true. Now in this particular one though, we're going to actually use this is still on show condition, and we're going to say if empire show array dot I, or bracket I, equals cookie, or copy that, Lucius, then we're going to do our output. And let's change this from positive loop to do while loop. And then what we're going to do is set is still on show to false. And that will kick us out of the loop. Next to lastly, we're going to copy that logic for our while loop. And instead of it being cookie, we're going to make this Jamal. And we don't want to put an and there because we're still just dealing with unique variables. So I'm not going to use an and. So if empire string array, we'll say not equal to Jamal, then we're going to do while loops there, else move that down here. So while this is true, we're going to do this logic here. And then lastly, my favorite, the for each loop, what you can do is you can create a variable here, implicit variable, based on the value that you're looking at. In this instance, it's going to be the empire string array. And by doing that, it automatically casts item as a string item outside of this array. If I did this for the dictionary, it'll create this as a key value pair. So C# is smart. It will automatically do that for you. But in this instance, I'm going to say empire string array. So I'm going to get the string there. And then I'm going to have a conditional in there, if item. And now I don't have to, because this is automatically going to do this for me right here. It's going to reference that index of the array automatically for me. So now, since I'm just messing with a string, I can use string methods on it. So I can say string item to upper stuff like that. So let's say I want to look for Jamal again. And I'll say now, if I want to make this conditional an else if, that means I know there's another condition that I want to look for. Let's say I'm going to use Hakeem here. Say I want to do something special for Hakeem. And I can say else do, just print out everybody else. Like that. So now I've got a do while loop of 2 for loops, do loop, and a while loop, and a for each loop. And we've already done this, so I can get rid of that right there. So let's iterate through our code and see what it does here. So I'm going to save this. And I'll put a debug over there. If you press the debug over there and then you come up to debug and you hit F5, you can go through each line of code. This is why I love Visual Studio. You can debug your code in real time. You can see where your stuff is broken and fix it before you get it out there. So I'm going to go ahead and the first thing, and then down here, you can see what your values are in each of your fields. As soon as it creates, F10, I've got my string array of values. So that's what I'm starting with. And now I'm going to create 2 new string arrays, and there's nothing in there. Count of 0. The Boolean value is still on show, is now set to a true. The iterator I, or the integer I, is set to 0 right here. And now I, as long as it's less than that length, so we have a 5 here. So 0 is less than 5, so this means it's true. And then I will add 1 at the end of our loop. So now we're going to do the logic inside. If our array and I is 0, so we're looking at Lucius right here, is Jamal, then it's supposed to do this. But this is not going to be true, because if we look at where we are, I is a 0, and we know our first element of our array is 0 is Lucius, it should fall down into this condition right here. And there it is. And we're going to add to our data dictionary a key and a value. So now you see the Empire Show Dictionary has gone from 0 to 1. And if we open that up, we can see we have Lucius is the key and the value is true. Yep, he's on the show. Hit F10. There's our first loop name. Now we're going to add 1 to I. So now I is a 1. We're going to do our conditional again. I is still less than 5. And we're going to go through our conditional once again until we get to Jamal 0, 1, 2, 3. So now we know that 0, 1, 2, 3, this should be the one where we fall into this conditional now, because we know that that is going to be Jamal. There we go. And we're going to add 1 to that dictionary. And we notice that Jamal is false because he's not on the show. And then we do our last one here. Now, since I is now 5, we are done with our first loop. Now let's go through the reverse loop. So since 5 minus 1 is 4, we're going to start right here on Andre. So I is now going to be 4. I is going to be greater than or equal to 0. That's going to be our true conditional. You see it says true. And as long as that's true, we're going to just go through our conditional in reverse. 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're done. Now, let's look at our other dictionary. You notice how they're in different orders? We've got Andre first in this one, but we have Lucius first in this one. We went in reverse. Now let's do our do while loop. We're just going to be outputting stuff to the screen here. Now, while this is true, this is still on show, it's going to kick out names. And now since we are looking at either Cookie or Lucius, and the first instance or first index of our array is Lucius, this is a true condition. This condition right here is true because this is an OR. So we're saying if our array equals Cookie or our array equals Lucius, then we want to do the logic inside of this block of code here. So that's what we're doing right here. And we set that it's still on show to false. And what's going to happen is it comes through and it sees that it's false. And it says, oh, I'm done. And the while loop works exactly the same way. Now, in this instance, and this is interesting here, because I didn't notice this. In this instance, what's going to happen is, since we set this variable up here to false, it's not going to go into this block of code here because this is now false. And the way we've got this, while it's still on show as false, it's true. I mean, it's not going to execute because do whiles and while loops look for trues. So it's going to skip over that like it did there. And then the last one is my favorite, the for each loop. And the for each loop is going to go through and do my logic based on what's in my collection of data. So now it's going to go through each one of it. It's going to say for each item, do the logic inside. So if it's going to be Lucius, boom. It's Cookie, it should come down here again, boom. If it's Jamal, it'll come in here. And it's Hakeem, so we're going to write Hakeem the Dream. This is going to be Jamal. It's going to say Juicy Smouye is gone, says Dave Chappelle. And then the last one is going to be Andre. It's going to come down here and do that logic. And we are done. So now if we output this, let's do this real quick too. Let's put one more bit of logic in there. Not a write, a read. And let's not debug that. And let's go ahead and debug that. Now we'll see what happens here. See that there? And I must have a write in there somewhere instead of a read. Yep, I have a write in there. like that. And let me put, because I'm kind of anal about this, and then in here, let's reset that to a true. All right, now let's rerun our code and see what happens. So our positive loop names are Lucius, Cookie, Hakeem, Jamal, Andre. Our negative loop names are the reverse ones, Andre, Jamal, Hakeem, Cookie, Lucius. The do-while loops, because of the conditions we have in there, are just going to be Cookie and Lucius. The while loop names are going to be not Jamal, because we have not equal to Jamal in there. And our for loops are going to say Juicy Sommelier is gone, Hakeem the Dream, and everyone else right there. So this is how you would use, or an example of how you would use some looping, some conditionals, while loops and stuff like that. And then if you wanted to get, so the better you get with loops and if conditions and stuff like that, you'll run into stuff called Linq, Linq. And that's a dynamic way to query anything as if it were in an SQL statement, which again, I love. So let's say I wanted to get everybody in those dictionaries here, or let's say I want to get everybody in let's say I want to make this a list, this array into a list of data. And I want to add this entire thing to this Empire Show directory. Here's how you would actually do something like this. I'm going to throw some Linq at you here. Don't worry if you don't get it. We'll talk about it later. So let's say I have a dictionary. I'm going to string my string of data here. And I've got my dictionary. I'm going to get rid of this. And let's say I'm going to do that add to that dictionary. Here's how I would do it. And let's say I'm going to say Empire Show Dictionary dot add key is going to be item. The value is going to be if something like this, var true var on show equals if item that equals Jamal. That's going to make a Boolean value there. I'm going to say on show, like that. Let's see what that does when it's not Jamal. So let's look to see what our Empire directory is. False, 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 true, false. So we don't want that. We want not item equals Jamal. And what that'll do is that'll make it the opposite of what we need. And if we look, everybody but Jamal should be true. Yeah, I use false right there. Now, let's say I wanted to make this a Linq query. This allows me to query this key value pair with a SQL-like syntax. So I can say var all folks set Jamal equals empire show dictionary dot where, and it's going to give me the little squiggly. Hover over it, control period. I can import the system.linq. Automatically imports up there. And I can make what's called a Lambda expression. X dot key is not equal to Jamal to list. And what that's going to do is going to give me a list of everybody but Jamal. So if I go through that right there, and I look at all folks except Jamal, you can see I got everybody except Jamal in there. We'll talk about Linq in a future video. I just want to show you how efficient something like this could be if you learn how to use C#. So hopefully you learned a little something. I know I went a little over my time. If you have questions, leave them in the comments. And as always, happy coding and God bless.